In the 1970s, Marvel Comics was on the brink of financial collapse, but one comic book, a total gamble, single-handedly pulled them back from the abyss. No, it wasn't Spider-Man, it wasn't the Fantastic Four, it was a licensed title that had no business being a blockbuster. Stick around because the story is just the tip of the iceberg. The entire comics industry was a powder keg in the 1970s, and it was about to blow wide open. The 1970s, as nerds like me like to call it, the Bronze Age, was more than just bell-bottoms and disco. It was a pivotal and frankly kind of messy decade for the comic book world. After years of being strangled by the Comics Code Authority, a new wave of creators, young, hungry, and a little rebellious, came along and decided that maybe comics didn't just have to be for kids. This era wasn't just about good stories, it was about fundamental shifts in how comics were created, sold, and even respected. Today we're cutting through the noise to look at the 5 books that didn't just sell well, they fundamentally altered the landscape, paving the way for the modern industry we know today. It's a common misconception that comics from the 70s are outdated and not as influential as the blockbuster titles of the 80s. And sure, the 80s had their fair share and maybe even a little bit more. That's a hot take and it's dead wrong. The foundation for everything that came after, from Watchmen to Saga, was laid in this exact decade. The comics we're talking about today weren't just good stories, they were Trojan horses, subtly changing the rule of the game from the inside out. Get ready because what you're about to learn might just make you question everything you thought you knew about the history of the comics medium. Our first world changer is a soggy, leafy monstrosity. I'm talking about Saga of the Swamp Thing. Now, you can't talk about this comic without talking about the Comics Code Authority. The CCA was like the grumpy old librarian of the comic book world, censoring anything they deemed too scary, too violent, or too out there. They'd all but wiped out the horror genre from mainstream comics, but in 1971, according to an article from Wikipedia, the CCA decided to loosen up its rules, allowing for vampires, werewolves, and other classic monsters, as long as they were handled in a literary way. And just like that, the floodgates opened. This change allowed writer Len Wein and artist Bernie Wrightson to unleash the Swamp Thing on an unsuspecting public. Their initial run wasn't some quiet intellectual exercise, it was a bona fide gothic horror hit. It was a monster story for a mature audience, something that had been virtually impossible to find in a mainstream comic for almost 2 decades. But here's the genius of it. The success of Swamp Thing proved, with cold, hard sales numbers, that a market existed for mature horror-themed stories. This wasn't just a creative victory, it was a commercial one. It showed DC Comics that they could make money outside of the typical superhero and sidekick fare. The biggest payoff? The success of this single title laid the groundwork for the Vertigo imprint several years later, an entire publishing line dedicated to creator-driven, sophisticated, and yes, adult content. Without Swamp Thing laying the foundation, we might not have had classics like Sandman or Preacher. It established a new, sustainable business model for mature content inside a major comics house. It took a monster to prove that comics could be far more than just a preteen audience. Next up, the team that was so bad they got a second chance. The original X-Men title, created by Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, was a commercial dud. By 1970, it had been reduced to a glorified reprint book. It was a creative dead end. And then, in 1975, a phoenix rose from the ashes. I'm talking about Giant Size X-Men #1, which introduced a new, truly international team. The new roster included heroes like Storm, Colossus, Nightcrawler, and of course, the angriest Canadian in comics, Wolverine. With writer Chris Claremont at the helm, the new series didn't become an overnight sensation. It was a slow burn, a testament to the power of long-term, long-form storytelling. Claremont's nearly 17-year run transformed a struggling title into a global blockbuster. Why? Well, before the 70s, many comics were built around a single, iconic hero. But as a Reddit discussion notes, for example, Uncanny X-Men proved that you could build a massive, dominant franchise around a large, diverse ensemble cast with incredibly complex personal drama. This was a seismic shift in the way superhero comics were thought of. The soap opera level plotting and continuous subplots hooked readers like never before. It was a new paradigm for team books. The result? A self-sustaining ecosystem of spin-off titles and miniseries. A franchise model that became the cornerstone of Marvel and DC's business strategy for decades. This wasn't just a successful reboot, it was a blueprint for how to build a comic book empire. Okay, if you thought that was good stuff, let's get to the great stuff. The story I teased at the very beginning. By the late 1970s, Marvel Comics was in deep financial trouble. Their flagship titles were stagnant and they were bleeding cash. They needed a miracle. In 1976, Marvel licensed the rights to publish a comic book adaptation of a sci-fi movie no one had heard of yet. That movie? Star Wars. And according to a documentary that you can find on YouTube right now, that comic book unexpectedly became a financial supernova. The first 6 issues simply adapted the film, and sales were so massive they single-handedly provided a crucial financial lifeline. This comic wasn't just a hit, its sales far outpaced every other Marvel title and, as the report notes, pulled the company back from the brink of financial disaster. This is a cold hard fact, but the impact goes so much deeper than just one company. Star Wars proved the extraordinary commercial potential of media tie-ins. It established a brand new, incredibly lucrative revenue stream for comic book publishers. It showed that a comic could function as a valuable marketing tool to promote another medium, and that non-superhero license could be a bigger financial hit than any flagship superhero title. The success of this comic created a boom in licensed comics, a practice that continues to this very day, from Stranger Things to The Last Airbender. Now we move on to something completely different, something that is more along the lines of a real rebellious act. We've talked about a DC book and a Marvel book, but the 1970s also birthed a revolution from the ground up. In December 1977, a man named Dave Sim began publishing a comic about an anthropomorphic aardvark. The comic was called Cerebus. What started as a parody of Conan the Barbarian evolved into a wildly complex, self-published epic that explored politics, religion, and gender. And a journal from American popular culture confirms this was the case. The series ran for 300 issues, ending in 2004, a feat of creative endurance that is almost unparalleled. The real reason Cerebus is a game changer is because it was a completely independent, creator-owned comic. Dave Sim did everything himself. He wrote it, he drew it, he published it. His commitment to a monthly schedule and his complete creative and financial control proved that a creator could bypass the traditional gatekeepers, the big publishers. This success directly inspired an entire generation of indie creators and helped lay the groundwork for the modern direct market, where creators could sell their work directly to comic book stores, bypassing newsstands entirely. Cerebus didn't just change comics, it changed the very business paradigm of how they were made and sold. And finally, last but not least, the one that made people outside of our niche take notice. Before 1978, the term graphic novel was largely a piece of industry jargon, a fancy name for a very long comic. But then, legendary creator Will Eisner released A Contract with God. An article from Wikipedia notes that this work is widely credited with popularizing the term and establishing the format as a legitimate literary medium. The book had no capes, no costumes, and no supernatural abilities. It was a collection of interconnected, mature, slice-of-life stories set in a New York tenement. It was about the messy, complex, and deeply human experience. This was a major step away from the established formats and subject matter of American comics. You weren't getting a floppy, you were getting a complex and, in some cases, even dense story. A Contract with God signaled that comics could be a serious art form, capable of tackling the same weighty subjects as prose novels. It helped legitimize the medium in the eyes of the general public and literary critics. It provided a powerful and influential blueprint for the non-superhero long-form narrative that is now a cornerstone of the comics landscape. When you hear people say, well, they're writing for the trade, when they're talking about how decompressed a monthly floppy can be, well, the trade began with this book in all practical terms. It was a shot across the bow of the literary world, a bold claim that comics were here to stay and they weren't just for fun and for kids. So there you have it, 5 comics from one incredible decade that each struck at the heart of the industry and changed it forever. We had Swamp Thing loosening the reins on mature content, Uncanny X-Men perfecting the business of team building, Star Wars saving a company and forging a new revenue stream, Cerebus proving the impossible dream of creator-owned success, and finally, A Contract with God giving comics a seat at the literary table. The 1970s were a turbulent time, a bronze age of experimentation, and the seeds planted then blossomed into the incredible, diverse landscape we enjoy today. Now before you go, if you like this deep dive into the business of comics, and if you want to see more content that doesn't just talk about the what, but the why, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit that bell for notification. It helps a ton, and you won't miss our next deep dive. Now, go read comics, but read wisely. I'll see you next time for more comical opinions.